Hello, my name is Michael, and welcome to my neural network crash course. So in this course, you will learn the basic concept of neural networks, which is a really important algorithm when it comes to machine learning and of course artificial intelligence. Now, don't worry if you don't know any math or any concept of computer science. All you need to know is just listen and you will learn something along the way. So let's get started. So neural network is basically a group of neurons that passes information to each other to perform certain tasks or recognize certain things. We'll talk about neurons later on, but all you need to know right now is that neural network is an algorithm. It's like a blueprint for your brain. And in order to create this blueprint, it needs us data. And then it needs these two together to train into a model, which it will be the brain in this case, and we can use the brain to perform the certain tasks or recognize certain things that we want them to do. Now, let's start with a simple example of creating a neural network that can recognize something like Yoshi. So if you play the game Mario, you will know that Yoshi is a character that helps Mario to run faster, jump higher, eat enemies, and stuff like that. Now, we take our visions for granted when we look at things and we can just recognize it right away. Now we need to learn how a computer recognizes the image the way we do. Of course, they don't understand the way we do because first, they don't view the image like how we view it right now. They view it as a bunch of pixels. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I will just split the image into 9 different pixels. Well, we know that in reality, it will be probably around 200, 500, something like that. Now, in each pixel, there will be assigned a value. Now, this value can be the color or the brightness or whatever. But these values will be very important for the data to feed into our neural networks. So before we jump into neural networks, we need to understand this component of this neural network called neurons. Now, neurons is basically taking in data and then pass the data to another neurons. And within each neuron, it works something like this. So each neurons will take in certain inputs. These will be our values from the Yoshi picture. We add these inputs, also known as weights, add them together with a bias, and then let it go through this thing called the activation function. Now, the activation function is basically taking the total weights of our inputs and bias and basically double check if it's valid enough for them to pass it on to the next neurons or not. Now, of course, we know the data doesn't just pass on one neuron. It needs a lot of neurons, and we can group them. And the group of neurons is also known as a layer. Now, in neural networks, there are 3 important layers that you will learn. So the first one will be the input layer. Input layer basically takes in the input data and then pass into this new layer called the hidden layer. Hidden layer is basically the layer that will check the data further in detail. Like, for example, it will check the lines of the data, and then later on checks the color of the data, and then later checks in the components, or in this case, think about like Yoshi's head or tails or shoes or whatever. But again, for simplicity, we're just sticking with one hidden layers in our case. And after it passes all the hidden layers and stuff like that, it will pass into the final layer called the output layer. Now, the output layer is where the final destination, when the data pass through this layer, it will actually determine what type of data it is. Now, for our use case, we need to know that just need 2 outputs in our neural networks. So is to recognize whether a picture is a Yoshi or not a Yoshi, which is why we only had 2 neurons for our output layer. So let's actually see what happened when we pass an image through the neural networks and how everything works and when it's training. Now, we know that the computer viewed the image as a bunch of pixels with a bunch of values, and these values will pass from first an input layer and then pass into the hidden layers and then pass into the output layer. The movement of these data moving from input layer all the way to output layer is known as the forepropagation. As the data move from input to output, the output layer will give a certain result that looks something like this. In our case, the result from here is Yoshi. It's 0.4, 40%, and not Yoshi is 0.6. That's a little bit weird, isn't it? We know that this image is Yoshi, and it says it's not Yoshi. Like, why does the neural network got it wrong? And how does the neural network know that it got it wrong? Well, before we feed the image to the neural network, we also give the actual result of what this image is, or is also known as the label. So our image here, image 1, is labeled as Yoshi. That's how the neural network will look at it. Oh, it's supposed to be Yoshi. I guess I need to double check everything again. And by double checking, it basically takes in the data from the output layer, go back to the hidden layer, and then go back to the input layer to readjust its weights, which this movement from output to input layer known as the back propagation. Now, it will basically go forward and backward and forward and backward until it readjusts the weights to give the result that we want later on, something like this. Now in this case, we finally got our Yoshi to 90% and not Yoshi to 10%. Well, as we know, it's hard to get data to like 100% most of the time when you work with machine learning. Sometimes 90% is pretty high in this case, but we'll go on. So we learned that neural networks can actually, in our case, recognize the Yoshi picture, and of course, this is not the only thing that it can do, and there's also further application of what neural network can do. For example, by recognizing the hand digits. In this case, like recognizing all these hand digits numbers as 1, 2, 3, and so on. And also even more complex, you can even recognize cars, like the way our neural network recognizes Yoshi. As we can see this image here, because it recognizes all the cars, traffic lights, it'll be useful to another thing called autonomous vehicle, which basically help drive to create AI for driverless vehicle. Something that's really cool in the future. And it's a lot of amazing things that you can do with neural network once you have a deep understanding of it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this lecture and hopefully learned something. I know I did, and thanks for listening.